Podcast, everyone. I'm Justin Halvorson, and today I'm joined by Nate Jefferson, Matt Mancini, and Costa Giannottis to talk about the new stimulus bill that is on the desk over in Congress. Before we get into that, though, we're going to touch on everybody's stories briefly. So, Nate, for personal finance, looks like you wrote about credit cards this week. Can you get us started?
I did. And I touched on this topic because we see a lot of these credit card forms and applications coming in the mail. And next thing you know, we end up signing off on one because it's the first thing we see. At the end of the day, that's not how we should go about when shopping for a credit card. So this week, I dig in on how to shop for a credit card, what to look for, what's common when you're shopping for one, and how to just make sure whatever you're finding is the best fit for you for the current time and in the future ahead.
Awesome. It's great that you're writing about that. I know I get those every single day. It seems like a new credit card. So Matt, we'll switch gears a little bit here and talk about some stuff in the market. So it looks like you wrote about Clubhouse. So what's going on in Clubhouse?
Yeah, so Clubhouse is a new app that actually was developed less than a year ago. It was developed, I think, in April 2020. And it's essentially an audio only app where it's kind of like a podcast and you're scrolling through Twitter while also attending a conference, and you don't see these people. It's straight audio, and it started gaining a lot of hype because Tesla CEO Elon Musk, he actually asked the Russian president Putin to have a conversation with him on it, and Musk also actually had a conversation with Robinhood CEO about the whole GameStop controversy, and they talked about that for a little bit. Also in the article, you can see some of the security concerns that they've seen, as well as moderation issues and some issues they've had with it that they're still trying to work out. So check it out.
That's awesome. Yeah, I know that's the new thing. I keep hearing about it. So I'm definitely going to be looking at that one. All right. And last but definitely not least, we've got a guest today on the show, Costa Giannottis, the treasurer of WMA. So Costa, looks like you wrote about the Fed's fund rate. Tell us about that.
Yeah, so the federal funds rate is basically how the Federal Reserve controls the economy. I wanted to write about this because I think it's a really integral part of the economy and how the economy works. And you're always hearing about the Fed. Are they going to raise rates, lower rates? Basically, it's just a tool for them to either speed up the growth of the economy or slow down the growth when they feel that things are getting too inflated and there might be too much foam on top of the economy. So that's just a tool they use. Check out my article for a little bit more detailed description for sure.
Awesome. That's such a great article, and it just fit in perfectly with the stimulus talk that we wanted to get into today. So that's definitely one of the main tools that the Fed uses, right, Costa? I guess to kick things off, I want to ask our guest today, Costa. So looks like we've got a $1.9 trillion stimulus bill on the desk. What do you think about that, man? Do you think this $1,400 in the stimulus bill, is that going to go out to Americans when the Senate votes on it?
Yeah, I think it will. Personally, I just think people are still struggling. The unemployment rate rather is still pretty high, and Congress and the current administration seems to be willing to do pretty much anything in order to get people help. So I think I read they're trying to get this done before March 14th, which is when a lot of the unemployment programs are going to expire. So I would guess that's probably going to get passed in the next week or so, maybe 2 weeks max. Yeah, I think $1,400 is going to be helpful for a lot of people for sure. I guess how that relates to my article, I can kind of bring it back, but stimulus is more fiscal policy, and the Fed funds rate has to do more with monetary policy. So like I said, just check out my article and maybe do a little bit more research if you're interested in that. But yeah, I guess I'll throw it out to the other guests to do their opinion as well.
Nate, how about what do you think, man? So far we've had 2.2 trillion in the CARES Act, and we had another 920 billion that passed in December of 2020. So we're looking at 1.9 trillion. Looks like we're recording this on March 1st, and the Senate is going to be voting on it by the end of the week. So like Costa said, looks like there's a lot of benefits in there. What do you think, Nate? I'll pose you the same question. You think this is going to pass before the end of the week here, first week in March?
I hope so. I know it's needed. It's been long awaited. People have been waiting on it. They've been asking for it, and the Biden administration has been pushing for it to happen. A big thing that they're trying to push for as well is the $15 minimum wage, the federal minimum wage. And I know a lot of people are just rubbing their hands, staring at the news stations and all the news articles, trying to see what's going to happen. And based on the research that I've done, it's not looking like that's going to be something that's going to happen. When it came down to the vote in the House, I think they had no bipartisan support. It was all Democrats that voted for the bill to be passed, right? And so when it comes to the Senate, it's likely like the Senate is just going to shut it down. And for me, I found that pretty tough, just based on all the wealth disparity conversations that have been going around with this current age, just with a new wave of inclusive and diversity training within corporations, but also a better understanding of why we need those conversations to happen because of the great disparity, both with opportunities and income and wealth within this country. So at the end of the day, I think it's much needed and it's been long awaited, but at the same time, it's just one step forward to help us get to where we need to be. So I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, I'm going to relay off of that. I definitely agree with like the stimulus bill. And I think it's like, it's something that people need. It's something that, you know, is essential to people. But my only thing with it is that it doesn't really, especially like the stimulus checks in general, at least with my personal experiences, I know that there were some people that were still working, that were working 40 hours a week and still getting stimulus checks. I know a guy personally, I'm not going to say his name, but he has $12,000 just sitting in the bank just from stimulus checks. And there's multiple other people that also have the same thing. And not even because they were qualified for it, but because they applied early. And I think that was something that was really just kind of grind my gears because I was working all during the pandemic and during the summer. So like I didn't apply until like June, but then came the fall, I ended up becoming unemployed and I didn't qualify for any unemployment checks. And the only reason why is because I didn't apply early. And I think there's also some other people, a lot of people of color that also deserve and need these stimulus checks and they're not given it for arbitrary reasons. And I think that was one thing that I don't like about the stimulus bill is that they're not reforming the Department of Labor and Economic Opportunity. They're not really putting any money into that. Because if you call them, you're put on hold or they kind of like push you away. So that was because you need to put money into that to kind of improve the system. So
yeah, for sure. Just going off what you just said, Matt, I was listening to a podcast actually with our boy Josh Brown a couple weeks ago, and he was talking about how he had a guest, Allison Schrager, who's like I think she's a professor of some sort or an academic. She's in academia, and she's sort of an expert on risk and how risk works. She's got a book out. I forget the title, but anyways, my point is that she made the point of the government is not necessarily good at this because I don't think that they've ever really done something of this scale before. So the good news is that hopefully the third round, they'll get better at it and they'll begin to sort of put in a system where they can send these checks out and just direct deposit them or send them directly to people. To your point about them sort of giving them the people who might not need them or missing people that do need them, that's I don't know how that gets fixed. Like that's a huge problem for sure, because like I'll say for myself, I definitely didn't need it. I was getting unemployment when I probably shouldn't have. Maybe I shouldn't admit that, but if it's out there, people are going to take advantage of it. That's just human nature. So yeah, there's definitely things that need to be fixed. But the good news, like I said, is the more iterations that we do of this, I think we're just going to get better at it, or rather the government is going to get better at it.
Yeah, I mean, it's perfectly, all my friends like in my frat, they're all like, yeah, we got an unemployment. They like feel bad, but it's like,
right.
It's not like it's anybody else's fault. Honestly, if anything, it's my fault. Because with my whole thing, like I said, I was working and I was like, I don't want to get unemployment if I don't need it. But then I saw my friends making like $750 a week, and I was making like $200-300, like working as like an minimum wage job. So it was like, I guess I'll apply for it. So it was like, but I kick myself in the butt now. But this time I'm applying early. Like I'm applying the day it gets passed, I'm applying that day. Like.
Bro, it was so tough because during the summer, matter of fact, in March when it first hit and they first started bringing the unemployment checks, I was working an insurance gig, and it's 100% commissions. And this is during the pandemic, the worst time in our country. And I'm knocking on doors trying to sell products. And they're like, what are you doing, kid? Get out of here. So I was broke the whole time. And meanwhile, my friends are just telling me how much they're running it up based off the unemployment money they got. And I'm just like, shut up, bro.
Yeah, that was the same with me. I was making no money on my commissions job. And I was like, why am I doing this?
Yeah.
But I do want to touch on the wealth disparity conversation again one more time, just because it's such a huge topic right now. And they really want to introduce a $15 minimum wage just to combat that. And I think it could solve some problems, but at the same time, just because you have more money in your bank account doesn't mean your savings rate necessarily will go up, right? Doesn't mean that your level of financial literacy will improve. And in the bill, they were trying to cut out the some of the student loan forgiveness, and or they were trying to add that into the provision, and they ended up cutting that out. And I saw that and I looked at that, and it kind of left me a little weird, just because it seemed like they're trying to take care of a problem in the now and not in the future. And I say that because we understand that education is the main way of upward mobility, right? Like, you need to become educated. It's shown educational statistics that the people that are more educated, they're more successful in this country. Like, it was a statistic that came out that the people that have post-grad educations have an average household wealth or average wealth of $484,000, right? And then just a GED is $18,000. So you'd feel like they push more towards this education route by saying, hey, we'll incentivize it some way if you get an education, whether that be through LCC, whether that be through MSU, that we can allow you to get some information to be able to put yourself in a better position in the future, rather than just giving you money and say, here, just go crazy, put it back in our economy so we can just continue the cycle over and over again. Like, at the end of the day, it's not really solving anything. And so I would like them to have some type of action that would allow them to incentivize going to college, getting that education, becoming more financially literate in order to combat some of this wealth inequality.
Well, you are, that is a good point that you bring up, like how just giving money to these kids, like if you're like a college kid and you get $1,400 like in a random check, what are you going to do with that? Are you going to put into savings, or are you going to just blow it? 95% of the time they're going to blow it. So
I dropped this in the show notes to prepare. This is a pretty interesting graph out of the Wall Street Journal yesterday. It shows the personal savings rate from 2007 up into the pandemic. You can see those two shaded lines are the recession, so the 2008 financial crisis and then 2020. What's crazy is personal savings rates actually shot up through the roof after the first round of stimulus. Not so much after the second round. You can see there, well, I mean, I guess, yes, in comparison, not so much, but you guys can see that the savings rate actually did shoot up after people got these stimulus checks. So I just thought that was pretty interesting because, like we're saying here, it seems like we injected all this money into the economy, so to speak, or we tried to, and it didn't, I don't know, make it out of people's bank accounts. So I totally agree with you, Nate. I think that, I don't know if just throwing money at a problem is really solving it. I don't know. What do you guys think about that?
Yeah, the interesting thing, Justin, is that we pumped all this money into the economy, and at the same time, people weren't able to necessarily go out and spend it on trips and different things like that. So everything was sort of closed down. So, I mean, when you can't spend money, it basically just becomes de facto saving it, right? So people just kind of left it in their bank accounts or invested it, which I think is great. More people involved in the market, regardless of if they're trading meme stocks or if they're not, is a good thing, in my opinion, just because, you learn some lessons and maybe you invest more prudently the next time. But that is an interesting kind of piece that through a recession, people saved more money, which is kind of counterintuitive when you think about it.
I mean, it definitely shows like the kind of, I would say, like just throwing money at the problem. Like that doesn't really solve anything. Like, I get putting money into savings like is good for the long term, but a lot of these people, I mean, they don't necessarily need it. Like, a lot of those people who got it, they don't, like, they're not struggling day to day. And that's kind of like the purpose of unemployment, is for people that don't have like a consistent income.
Yeah, I'm curious about the statistics when it came to receiving unemployment, because I feel like it'd be better to go down that route a little bit more with the stimulus. So the people that are out of work and need money, well, here's some extra money for unemployment, or a better way to say like, hey, if you need help, here's the help, instead of saying, hey, like Oprah, you get 1,400, you get 14. Like, it's just not really needed. So if they could come up with a better way to dish out the money, because I think that's the main reason why some of the Republicans don't want to be on top of this. They don't want to be on board with this. It's just because not everybody needs $1,400. You know what I'm saying? And I think it was for a household income or maybe an individual income of 75,000, and that's a lot. That's above the average. So it's just like, how bad do you need it? Like, what situation are you in to be able to use this viably?
Well, that's like just unemployment in general. I mean, there's always been that debate against like, oh, the system, like you could have people that are still working, that still have, full-time jobs, have like a couple of cars, and they're still receiving unemployment solely because they were like the first ones to apply for it. They were just vigilant about like applying for it. And that's really all it comes down to, is just like, you applied to it early and you get it, first come, first serve, which I don't think is right. I feel like there should be like criteria, like if you're first off unemployed, like they should probably check whether or not they're unemployed.
I totally agree with that. I'm dating myself. Have you guys anybody watch Seinfeld? Has anybody watched Seinfeld? Have you seen the latex salesman? That's the whole premise of the episode of George Costanza, right? Is he's got to keep coming up with fake jobs to tell the unemployment office over and over again. And the last one is a latex salesman. So anyway, that's all I was going to say, Costa.
Yeah, no, I just want to go back to something that Nate brought up about the $15 minimum wage not necessarily making it into the stimulus bill. And I think from a certain perspective, that's maybe a negative, but on the positive side, a lot of these corporations, as we've seen recently, have been just raising their minimum wage. So for example, I think Target, Costco, and Walmart have all raised their minimum wage, and these are employers of thousands of people. So in a certain light, like, it looks terrible that we weren't able to get that $15 minimum wage, but on the other hand, maybe the private sector is better at that, and that they can sort of raise these wages maybe more organically.
Well, we could still potentially get it. It just might not be in this bill. Like,
right.
Nancy Pelosi said, we will not rest until we pass the 15 minimum wage. So I mean, like, that's a big statement. So just seeing where they go with it moving forward, I'm just curious. I'm not that big on economics. Like, I'm in my first micro class right now.
Mm-hmm.
Do you guys know whether or not that if they introduce the $15 minimum wage bill and it gets passed, that goods would just increase, the cost of living would just increase? Like,
yes,
it won't really solve anything. Like, I'm just like, if that happens, then you just wasted all that money for what? Like, you know what I'm saying? Like, of course it's going back into the economy, but at the same time, it's just like, what was all that effort for?
Well, plus it's like, you have to think, if you're paying 3 workers $10 an hour to do, a job, and they increase the $15 minimum wage, they're just going to fire one of those workers because it'll cost more to pay them. And that's kind of what I'm worried about. I mean, I work at the front desk for the resident halls, and I get paid $12.50 an hour. If it increases to $15 an hour, there's only probably 2 dozen of us. I could lose my job and be like,
Absolutely.
well, so, and that's unfortunate, but it's just the reality.
Especially the fast food industry. My bad, bro. Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, there's you guys are kind of getting at it, but there's tons of variables with this. It's not necessarily just, oh, we're going to pay people more money and everyone's life is going to be better. There's a lot more to dig into there. And it's tough to sort of present that to the general public because, like you said, Nate, a lot of people just don't really understand like the economics of how this might work.
Yeah.
Which is why I kind of brought up that point of, maybe the private sector raises minimum wages for their personal employees, or not personal, but their employees. And that benefits people better than if they were to just, okay, everybody makes $15 an hour. And the other thing about that too, not to sort of get on a tangent here, but it also, you have to factor in like cost of living too. So like, for example, in Chicago, it costs a lot more to just live there than it does in Lansing or East Lansing. And that's something too. So like, even if you make $15 an hour in say like a Chicago or San Francisco or big city like that, it might not benefit you as much as somebody who lives in like a Lansing or a smaller town, rural town. So like I said, there's tons of variables to this.
Great point, Costa. This is just the chart I threw up on the screen. I know we're going to put this video up on YouTube and in the show notes. So if anybody wants to see this, this is out of the Wall Street Journal again. This is showing you the different state minimum wages. So you can see, like Costa, using your example, Michigan, we're almost $1.50 less than Illinois.
Right.
Like just on average. So look at California compared to Michigan. Everybody's standard of living is totally different. And the only other argument I would insert here, so the argument against raising the federal minimum wage to $15 an hour is it could hurt small businesses, especially when we're opening things up, because at the end of the day, the Amazons and the Walmarts, they can afford to pay people $15 an hour. But, you know, Rick's down the street, or like you're saying, Matt, the residence halls, they're not going to be able to potentially afford that. And that's going to put people out of work and potentially affect small business owners. So I think that's the other part of the argument against raising the federal minimum wage.
Yeah, I also have like 2 more points. And one of them was in that article. It's like, why not just be gradual with it? Like, you don't like going from 8 to 15, like, why don't you like increase it 1 year after? Because like, if you look at it, minimum wage is way lower than it should be. Like, that's why they're saying $15 an hour, because just based off inflation and the standard of living, it should be $15 an hour. And it hasn't been increasing proportionally for God knows why. But another thing that they really haven't touched on is, what about these workers that are working 40 hours a week at these big corporations and not receiving benefits? They're not receiving health insurance, life insurance, any of that. And I think that's something that and I think like places like Costco and Best Buy do, but you really think a McDonald's worker who's doing it as a full-time job is getting health insurance from there? No.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it's good that you bring that point up, because you got to think of it also as not just wages, but as like total compensation package. And I went through this actually personally when I was receiving my offer from my firm for next year. They sort of brought that point up to me, and it kind of like a light bulb clicked or went on in my head. And I was like, okay, so it's not necessarily just like I'm making X amount per year, but there's also, you know, XYZ after that. So like, that's a really good point too. And I think some of those things go further than wages too. Like if you're offering, say, I mean, it's a little maybe out there, but maybe like a 401k for someone who's making maybe near minimum wage, that's increasing their benefits because it's saving them money over time. And then they'll have some sort of retirement fund or whatever for when they reach the end of their life or the end of their employment. So that's a really good point too.
From that same article, I will show one more little chart here. This does show the federal minimum wage over, the last 70 years. So since 1950, we are in a period of extreme stagnation. You guys are totally right. So we haven't raised the federal minimum wage since 2009. It still sits at $7.25. And what are these lines here? So the proposed, if you guys can see, frankly, I have no idea what the hell this yellow line means, $20, but the proposed, it would almost double what we're at now. So it is, it's going to be interesting. I do think that the Senate will pass it because, like you were saying, like we alluded to earlier, I think the official ruling was they're going to vote on this bill on Friday, but they're going to vote on it without the federal $15 minimum wage. That's going to be like removed from the bill. So hopefully that will still pass, and hopefully we will see everybody continue to act on the minimum wage. So any other thoughts, guys, about the stimulus bill? I know we covered a lot here, but any other thoughts?
No, I just want to say, actually, I'm really glad to have had this discussion. Thanks for having me on, guys. Like, this is a great guest spot for sure.
Yeah, I'm definitely applying for unemployment right after this.
If you enjoyed the discussion, please like and share the podcast on Apple and Spotify. The Spartan Journal Podcast is part of Michigan State University's Wealth Management Association, a student organization whose goal is to inspire the next generation of financial advisors. The Spartan Journal news team releases a newsletter every Monday morning comprised of financial literacy and the week's market updates. Feel free to follow us on social media at msuwma and check out our website at msuwma.com.
Anything heard on the msuwma podcast is for educational purposes only and should not be considered as investment advice.